Joining us now, it is our Rams writer here at The Athletic and the creator of the new Finding Rams draft series that you guys should absolutely go check out that ran, I believe, in May, right after the draft happened. That is a fantastic behind-the-scenes look at an entire year-long scouting process with the NFL team. It is Jourdan Rodrigue. Jourdan, really good to have you back.
I'm glad to be back. We're going to have some fun today. I've been excited for this.
So I wanted to do top 10 coaches, and I was trying to figure out how I wanted to do it and who I wanted to do it with. And we're going to do a draft today because I've decided that drafts are just the more dynamic way to do this. Rather than us listing off top 10s, be like, oh, I had that guy 7th, and where do we talk about him? And it just becomes a little bit naughty. So I think that drafts, while gimmicky, there's a reason that they work. So we're going to draft coaches today. And I was thinking about who I wanted to have this discussion with, and I'm not sure there's anyone else in America who has thought more about NFL coaches in so many different ways over the last 3 or 4 years than you have. So the way that we both think about them, talk about them, it really does feel like we're often interested in the same things, where things are going. And I just figured we would have a very good time drafting against each other because our boards are probably pretty similar. And I think there's going to be a lot of competitive juice here.
I know. I'm stoked. I'm like pulling my game face on as we speak. Although you were gracious. You gave me the first pick. So
You're the guest. I think you deserve it.
No one will be surprised by who I select. However, I did surprise myself as I constructed my big board, right? And see, I don't like the scouting series was so much fun because I was like in the weeds and in the building of all the different stuff that was going on in the draft. And I just watched from afar as everyone made big boards. So like, this is my chance to make up for the content that I did not produce during draft season. And this is like right up my alley. So I'm stoked about this.
I'd like to apologize before we even get started about the names that are going to come off the board here and the order they're going to come off. We're going to have a honorable mention section at the end because there are plenty of guys that are worth talking about that you can't squeeze into a top 10 list. So before everyone gets very angry, we're going to try to do our best to give everybody their proper due as part of this exercise. But let's get to it. I did give you the first overall pick. You can kick us off here. Who are you choosing as your top pick in the top 10 coaches draft here?
Surprising absolutely no one. I'm selecting with the number 1 overall pick, Los Angeles Rams head coach Sean McVay. I know, like, pick yourself up off the floor, Robert, because I know you're stunned right now.
This is what I think is so interesting about this is that you have such proximity to it. Yeah. That you understand both the good and the bad. And that's why I think that your kind of well-rounded understanding of who he is, how he operates, and what he is as a head coach, the fact that you're still so enthusiastic about putting him at the top here, I think that says a lot. So what ultimately gets him there for you?
Yeah, for me, the fact that he's so dynamic still, 7 years in, the culture setting aspect, even in 2022, when he and the Los Angeles Rams both essentially fell off a cliff. And it really exposed a lot of things about how the ship is completely built around Sean McVay. Every piece of that organization exists to achieve his highest functionality, which is at its best, or even at like 70%, is kind of a remarkable thing to see in the way that it lifts everything and everyone. I joke with him. A lot of coaches joke with him. He could call a defense right now. If you were going to line him up on the opposite sideline for an NFL defense, he could call that defense. Obviously, he is the offensive mind that we all know. But what I think is really interesting and doesn't actually get talked about enough, because yes, there is bad with that. If you build your entire organization around the functionality of the head coach, understanding the ceiling is pretty much limitless. It's Super Bowl appearances. It's always a team that's pretty much always in contention, depending on the health of the roster. It's a team that does not give two figs about dead money because other weight-bearing walls will solve the problem, including Sean. It is a person who understands quarterbacks, a person who pushes quarterbacks sometimes to their limits and other times to new areas that they wanted to explore. That all of those things can be double-edged, right? And we both know this. However, what I don't think is talked about enough about Sean is the constant turnover of his staff and the success that is still maintained despite the constant turnover of his staff. I've written this out a million times, but just to rattle it off, and I'm not trying to patronize the listener, I know they know this, but Sean's been coaching since 2017. He's had offensive coordinators and quarterbacks coaches who have a pretty high profile position within his staff to Matt LaFleur, Zach Taylor, Kevin O'Connell, Liam Cohen, though that was ultimately lateral, Zach Robinson, not to mention the defensive coaches. In 18 and 19, Sean did not actually have an offensive coordinator. I think people forget that. Those were the only years he didn't lose an offensive coordinator or quarterbacks coach. So he's lost like 5 in 5 years, essentially, to high ranking jobs. And so what I don't think people on the outside looking in often understand is, like, when you lose that person, you lose a piece of your language. You lose a person who is also shouldering an enormous amount of the workload that head coach depends on. And you lose ideas. Those ideas get sort of enveloped and unfolded in other areas and other parts of other teams. And you lose them from your building, and you lose the continuation and the evolution of those ideas within your own space. So what I am most impressed with is Sean over the years is his ability to almost compartmentalize that, to understand, I'm going to do this every year, to change and adjust the onboarding process. What people don't realize is the Rams, yes, there's the whole thing. They don't go to the combine, read Finding Rams, but like they don't go to the combine or like the Senior Bowl as a staff because he's incubating coaches. Yeah. That's when he's hiring new coaches, and that's when they're running all of their schematic incubators during that time, instead of going to these all-star events that the front office has personnel attending. So the time management around the course of a calendar year that has altered in order to continue to push forward and to continue to innovate. I gripe as much as the next person about some of the late down decision making, some of the play sequencing when he, calls a draw on 3rd and long because he's tossing out an entire section of the playbook. When those types of things, I gripe as much as the next person. But if that's the gripe, come on. Did I sell it?
You did a very good job. And we'll talk about some of the positives. There are a couple more, I think, selling points that I want to dig into. The negatives are worth pointing out. I remember we were at the Rams-Lions playoff game in January, and they punted literally and figuratively on a drive at the end of the half and just decided, like, we're okay. We're going to go to the half. And I remember walking over to you and just being like, why is he like this? It frustrates me so much when he does painful. These things where some of these decision-making, these situational decision-making issues, they continue. He's been one of the worst coaches in the NFL at timeout usage and application over the last 3 or 4 years. He burns them like they're free, and they're absolutely not. They're very useful. And the 4th down decision-making can be frustrating at times. But his ability to transcend all of that with everything else that he does, I think ultimately trumps it. I probably would have taken him number 2. And I think that there's a pretty obvious choice who's probably going after him, a guy who's won a lot of Super Bowls that we can talk about in a second. But beyond the coaching staff turnover, which I think is absolutely worth pointing out, and the same thing is true on defense. He's had to replace multiple defensive coordinators and continue to do a very good job with that. The inability to build on the previous year idea-wise, or what should be an inability to build on it as you cycle through offensive coordinators. The fact that they've been able to evolve to the degree...
And be in front. I mean, we talk about this all the time, not just to get where the league is, but to be ahead. This last year, the things that they were doing on offense, even before anyone was watching them, because everyone was still making fun of the roster, which granted had 41 players on it at one point and 44 rookies at another point. But fair, but also like people weren't watching this team when they came out of the gate and kicked the door down last year, playing all of these young players and running, duo against Seattle and sifting their tight ends and doing all of these things that like he's never done, but happened to catch to be in front again. And then what do you see? A couple weeks later, everybody starts doing the same thing.
One of my favorite things about talking to Sean over the years, especially over the last few years, is every single conversation with him is a glimpse into the future, because the way that he's thinking about the game is what is coming next. And I remember talking to him about Stafford and when they traded for Stafford and what the ideas were behind the move. And there was this priority on all-purpose plays. So we've reached a world where you can't just call your cover 3 beaters and your single high beaters, because that's just not how defenses are anymore. They're not giving you the answers to the test before the test begins. And having a quarterback who can access everything in a more unpredictable way was a huge starting point to how they were going to evolve on offense. And then you watch what that offense was with Matthew Stafford, and that's exactly what happened. And then some of the things that have come on defense, I think he's been able to predict those with kind of shocking accuracy. And that's why he's able to stay a half step or one full step ahead of the curve, despite all of this coaching staff turnover. Mm-hmm. It's a product of how his brain works, but it's a product of just being able to see things and see the chessboard in a way very few people can. And I think that's what's allowed them to sustain success in the way that they have.
Yeah, and sorry, I almost cut you off there. I got excited. This is fun already. I know who you're gonna pick, and I'm so excited because I was thinking about picking that person, right? But and I'll get to that in a minute. But I think with Sean, what pushed me over, I've watched him coach for 5 years, and right there every day in the building, and I know what he's about on the good days. I know what he's about on the bad days in terms of how he runs that building and how that building operates around him. I think for me, the biggest thing that sealed it, that kind of pushed it over of okay, you now are fully back in your groove, first of all, but second of all, you have entered a new phase of your coaching adulthood, essentially, of you're really getting into the good stuff now. You were in the great stuff before, and the flash, and being out in front, and the frenetic pace of having to consistently cycle over and doing so much of that in a vacuum, because you are losing voices, trusted voices in your building to bounce ideas off of each other and to try those things. But last year, watching him coach those kids, I mean, watching the way, the intentionality behind the way that they would even build drives into practice, using OTAs to reteach drills to 44 rookies for the first time. I walked out. I'd never seen anything like it in my entire life, how far back they had to start. And it's not a knock on the players. They draft smart players. We know this.
It's a matter of necessity. That's the reality of the situation.
They had to show them how to practice, but to see the intentionality and the building blocks being placed in tiny increments that you would lose your mind if you're Sean and you're impatient and you're trying to move forward faster, but knowing you could not rush that process. For him to practice that kind of discipline and intentionality with the way that he coached last year, first of all, you saw the product on the field kind of blow people away in terms of how far along they got relative to what that roster was and truly was, not just look like on paper. And to see the amount of thought and micro detail that went into that, but also on a human level, coming back and reaching players in a way he hadn't in 2022, coming back to himself in a way he hadn't in 2022. It just, for me, it was like watching somebody grow up in front of you, which I don't
reborn in a certain way.
I don't mean to sound patronizing at all with that either. It's just, I think that's really important. I think the really great, the legendary coaches rebirth themselves or are reborn many, 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 many times over the course of their career. And it's how you do it, how you walk into the next doorway. To me, that is what set Sean apart. And I'm really excited to see what he does over these next several years, because he is himself, but he is also altered. And I think that is why I picked him number one, because the capacity to change, not just your ideas and your scheme, but yourself, to push yourself into a new place that you need to be as a human, as a coach, as an adult. I think that was really, really important for him, and to watch was really cool. And that's what pushed him over the top as number one for me.
It's beautifully said. I think all of that is exactly right. And even as somebody who was watching sort of on the outside and had more peripheral conversations with him about that stuff, it was very impressive to watch. And I think the level of self-awareness that he exhibited on multiple different levels was staggering. And I think something that really does tap into what makes him special. And I remember talking to you last summer after I was there for a couple of days, and we were doing our kind of Rams preview on the show here. And it was kind of like, I don't know, man, I think they could be pretty good. I think that they could be so much better than people from the outside believe, because of the energy that he's been able to tap into and what those practices felt like. So I'm 100% with you. He probably would have been number two for me, but I'm going with Andy Reid as my number two pick here. And I probably would have picked Andy Reid number one. And, it's difficult because it's so hard to extricate who Andy Reid is from who the quarterback is. And when you have the best quarterback in the world and a guy who is on pace to be the greatest quarterback of all time, has had the best 6-year run of any quarterback of all time, probably, when you include individual accolades and team accomplishments, it's hard to pull those things apart. But you mentioned practice, and practice is actually where I'm going to start with Andy Reid. What is to me remarkable about Andy Reid is that Andy Reid is, I don't know how old, 60 something, in his early to mid 60s. And his ability to straddle this line between a coach who has tapped into what I would think is, I think Sean McVay is kind of the epitome of this this emotional intelligence centric model of modern NFL head coaches, where these guys there's more communication with players, there's more effort to be kind of get on the same level as your players and understand them and
Mhm.
open those doors. Andy Reid in his 60s does that as well as anybody does. The amount of trust and confidence he can instill in guys because the environment he creates is similar to a lot of these 35, 36, 37-year-old guys who should understand these 20-something kids better than anybody else. But he's able to do that while also establishing a standard and a physicality and a way that you're supposed to play that these young guys don't do. And I think that's remarkable. You know, the way that the Rams go through camp and the way that teams like the Bengals and some of these teams that are a little bit new agey, they take a step back. You know, it's not foot on the gas all the time. You hear about Andy Reid training camp practices. It's awful. I mean, it's absolutely awful, but guys are willing to do it because there's love on the other side of it. And I
Mhm.
think that balance is something that makes Andy so special. And then you combine that with the constant ability to innovate at this stage of his life. The fact that he's as deep into, I was going to say old, but the fact that he's as deep into this as he is,
He's
and he's
tenured.
constant, he's tenured, he's wise, he's he's constantly able to tap into, well, what if we tweak this and what if we tweak that? And it's always changing every single year. That's remarkable to me. And so I just think all of that stuff combined, we can talk about some of the other kind of details and other layers to it, but that's at the center of why I think he's special, even if it's hard to parse where his accomplishments start and where Patrick Mahomes' accomplishments end.
Yeah, I think well said, and I agree with you. I thought about this for a long time, and then I thought I have to set some parameters. I have to set parameters around this entire thing about like how I'm going to think about this because it's so. You want Andy Reid as your head coach. I mean, I don't care who you are, what organ, like you covet a head coach like that. And for me, I thought I had to look at it as if I were a team owner or a team president who was basically given a roster and like a control group like we talked about and then told to say, okay, we want to get this hire right and this is going to be, a decade, 15 years, maybe 20 higher. And so for me, the reason why I picked Sean was, I mean, frankly, because he's just, a younger guy and
Yeah.
thinking about those parameters. And I mean no offense by that at all, because Andy Reid is a stunningly remarkable mind. And what I really like about him is he's consistent. Like when people think about innovation, they think it happens in like these flashes and like starbursts, right? And like these little atoms that collide and everything. But he has this stability. Like he just does the thing over and over and over and over and over. And
There's
the
a
fact that
discipline to it.
yeah, and the fact that he is disciplined in this way, I think that is not only really important for his players to have the same person every day when they come to work, but also who is going to give them something. He's going to give them an answer to the test every single day when they come to work. So you really can take, you hear players talk about this all the time. You could take whatever the physical, brutal, drives are, whatever, like you can take the rough practices because you're getting answers to the test. And that's something that I think he's done at such a high level. I don't necessarily think it matters to separate the coach from the quarterback in this case. I know that's like maybe hot takey, whatever, but like because I think they found each other
Yeah.
because flashier coaches have done less with that quarterback, by the way. And like Andy Reid just shows up. He just shows up in a way that totally complements and also enhances so many of the players on his roster. And the other thing that I love, and this came up a few times over the course of my top 10 here, he doesn't seem to have an ego when he hires. He doesn't seem to have any, like he lets his D coordinator cook. Like you would be surprised, you would not be surprised, but some people would be surprised by how that can come up as an issue of between the head coach and then the DC or an offensive play caller and a defense. Like he gets out of the way. He lets his DC cook. And he understands that you're not always going to necessarily be the offense that's just dominating everybody. And you have to play to your strengths, not just, in each phase, but also to a man on the roster. And I think he does that really well.
I think complementary football is where I would go with that. And his ability to create a set of circumstances on offense and defense that have felt complementary. You've seen that throughout his tenure with Patrick specifically. I mean, those teams in 18, 19, defense was terrible. They couldn't stop anybody, and they played that way. It was all about, can we create 1 or 2 turnovers in this game and get the ball back like a pressing basketball team to complement this high-flying offense that we have. And now you see what the offense feels like, especially this year, combined with an elite defense, and things have shifted. And I think they understood that within the building. It's like, we can punt it every so often right now. As long as we run the ball well, we'll get to a final result that we feel comfortable with. And I think being able to kind of ride those waves year after year, that's what great coaches do. And that's what he's been able to do. And the coaching staff thing, and we mentioned that with Sean as a strength, and his ability to find a guy like Steve Spagnuolo and tap into that has changed everything for that organization over the last 3 or 4 years. And then on offense, they've cycled through offensive coordinators, and it hasn't really mattered, because I think the brilliance of what Andy did in Act 2 is he said, I don't really want to be the GM. I don't really want to do this personnel stuff. I'm going to be the guy in install meetings. I'm going to be the guy at the center of everything offensively. And then if you remove component pieces, it doesn't matter, because I am at the center of all of this. And I think that commitment to that sort of model within the building has ultimately allowed them to sustain success on that side of the ball in the way that they have, combined with having the greatest quarterback that I've ever seen. But if you go back to the 2017 Chiefs, that offense ruled. That offense was incredible. And there was nothing Patrick Mahomes-y about it until that final game of the year. So I know it's a while ago now, but I think it's important to remember what sort of offensive coach he was before that guy that wears number 15 got to town.
Yeah, I love that point, because like I said, I mean, it really does help significantly for a coach to have, one of the greatest of all time, top 2, like the greatest currently playing, like just incredible superstar quarterback at the helm. It helps. The thing though that can be tough, again, it goes back to being egoless. The thing that can be tough if you are that brilliant play caller and offensive mind is letting go. And letting that person fail, letting that person, it's hard to remember multiple Patrick Mahomes failures, but letting that person learn and grow, and continuing to support the entire ecosystem in terms of the scheme and the philosophy around that player as he grows up. And I think the other thing that I like about Andy Reid, and like I said, this top 5, at least the top 7, was really tough. I mean, it was fun as hell, but it was tough. Like, oh no, life is hard, right? Yeah, darn.
We're gonna get some tough decisions here in a minute, so you're allowed to say that.
I do like, and I wrote this down. I wanted to make sure to say it because it does go hand in hand to me. Why I think Sean is a great coach and will become an even greater coach as time passes. I wrote, I like that Andy Reid has already been through the shit and thrived on the other side in terms of his career. Andy Reid calls plays like a man who has gotten through his worst days and understands that failing on a down is hardly the end. And he just tries stuff. And again, I think it's the egoless, bright, sustainable, steady innovation that he carries with him.
And I think the other point about Mahomes, the last thing I'll say, not everyone would have let Patrick Mahomes be that version of Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah.
And I think his ability to kind of live outside of that rigidity, Andy Reid's ability to do that, was key in allowing Mahomes to kind of become the player that he ultimately did. And I don't think anyone or everyone would have allowed that sort of flexibility and would have been able to let go to that degree. But he was. And I think it's made a huge difference in shaping what that team is. All right. I figured those would be the top 2. In some order, I figured those would be the top 2. McVay was number 2 on my board. Okay. Now I think is where things get interesting. You have the 3rd pick here. Who are you going with your 3rd pick?
This surprised me in some ways. It did not surprise me in other ways. I know I've also set you up for draft success with the pick that I'm about to make, because I think I know who you have as your, anyway, I won't belabor the point. This is controversial a little bit. I'm selling it. I actually picked Matt LaFleur.
Wow.
Yeah. So I know.
I will say this. He was 4th on my big board.
Okay.
So it's not that far off. He was 4th for me.
This is when it gets really tough, because I had 2 others who I had right up there with him. But I looked at the body of work, what we thought he was, what we assigned to him based on his circumstances of the personnel that he inherited versus what he showed last year in developing the youngest roster in the league. I thought that his ability as a developer of talent, not just as a compromiser to greatness, and showed through in every way imaginable last year. I sat down with Matt last spring, and OTAs were ongoing, and I was sitting in his office, and he had all of these screens pulled up with all of these film cut ups of a few different teams that he was trying to borrow ideas from, that he was just unabashedly saying, I like that. I think that could fit our running back. I like that. I think that could fit one of our tight ends. Maybe we'll talk about this for the other one. And just trying to figure out what would be best for his players, especially understanding he definitely knew the stakes were for him last year. There was this entire need, I think more from the outside, but probably for a little bit from the inside as well, for him to show what he was capable of as an actual coach. And again, not somebody who is going to support, one of the greatest quarterbacks ever, who also, by the way, could stand there and call a game if he had to, and perhaps has. We don't know, but
he will this year. I promise you that.
Yeah. So, but I think like what was so interesting to me was at one point he turned to me and he looked at me and he was like, I have no idea what we're going to be next year. Like, I have no idea, but we're going to find it along the way. And right now, all I can do is be as prepared as possible with a wide range of concepts, ideas, schemes, and teaching tools to try to get the best out of these players, something that makes them feel good, something that makes them feel confident, something that helps bring them along to speed. And as the season progressed, you saw that happen. When I went to Green Bay, I spent the week beforehand talking with Matt Schneidman, our colleague at The Athletic, and he covers the Packers, does a great job. And Matt said something really interesting to me that had kind of like cracked out in the mutterings of what was going on the beat that week. And he said that week, Matt LaFleur had kind of changed practice around a little bit. Obviously the Packers were struggling, and it just seemed like doom and gloom ahead, and maybe they were about to hit a wall and then like kind of fall back the other side. And he changed practice a little bit to where they had a little bit more competitive periods. With a young roster, you can do that even into the season because you have energy and you're not necessarily not everyone's on a pitch count, that kind of thing.
Wear and tear isn't as big of an issue.
Yeah. And you just, you have energy, you're kids, and so, and he changed it to be a little bit more competitive, but also he changed it to be a little bit faster paced, freer, feeling like don't think, just go for everybody. And I think that moment to me sticks out to my mind of when they started to reveal themselves to him as a group, and he opened the space to allow that to happen instead of staying in his ways with all of the pressure and your season might be failing and the walls are closing in kind of a thing. But instead he and the team sort of revealed themselves to each other in that way and opened that space to create something that became a much more evolved version of what I think any of us really expected from that offense through the course of the year, looking at that roster. The work with the quarterback also, because I think Jordan Love is outstanding. And the work with Jordan Love, it can be so it can be so fraught with a quarterback. The line of success or failure, it is so narrow. And like I'm rewatching Lord of the Rings right now, and they're talking about Galadriel is talking about like one false step and the entire thing could tumble. Like that is being a young quarterback. So that's a tortured metaphor, but that's being a young quarterback, like, saving the free world, it's fine. But you can absolutely implode if you have one bad week, if you have a repeated mistake, if you aren't given the confidence, if you don't have the space to learn. And I think
he had a couple bad weeks. I remember that Raiders game pretty damn well.
Yeah. But and it's a credit to Jourdan too, because he stayed the course and he is made of the right stuff. And like, he handled that really, really well, especially for being so young. But he also didn't have like a veteran receiver in the room. I remember talking with Matt. It was like, normally the veteran receiver paired with the young quarterback, he's telling the quarterback what he likes, what to do. Instead, it's like a bunch of kids kind of all learning together about what is right, what is wrong, what they can do, what they can't do, what they like, what they don't like. And in doing so, becoming empowered to speak to those things. And I think Matt opening the space to allow that to happen really kickstarted a lot of that talent development. And you could see him start to, gain his own momentum as a coach, as a play caller, really down the stretch. And then you could feel the confidence coming. I would gripe a bit with sticking with some of the hires for a little bit too long.
Yes, that's my main concern.
Yeah, I would gripe with that. I think he, not to speak for him, this is my own thought, but just, I think you learn a lesson from that. I think if that happens and you go back and you watch what's actually going on and where you're vulnerable and how things are being taught like that, then you realize you learn a pretty big, significant lesson from that. But I also think that in some of these buildings where it is very much, especially the tree, right? It's very much the coach who has such a significant say in personnel decisions. This is a little bit of a different building. It's more of a, like an equilateral share. It's traditional. So you really do work with who they give you. Yes, you have a say, but you really do work with the players who are selected for you as the coach. And that's what I think coaching is. And I think that's sustainable. And I think that is so apparent that he wasn't just this guy that was winning, a shitload of games and happened to have one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time at the helm. He also can develop players. And so this is a bit of a risky pick for me because it's a bit of projection that he can continue to do this when we saw it for a year. But I was really, really impressed by that year. And more so, I was really impressed by that conversation where he basically said, if we fail, it's on me because I haven't prepared them enough. Instead of a million different things about the youth of that roster or whatever. Instead, he was doing everything he could to control what he could and then allow freedom and space and bumps and failure along the way in order to continue to evolve those ideas forward.
I would have had him fourth. This isn't crazy to me at all. And I think a lot of the stuff that you said absolutely tracks. And something I think is going to come back a couple of times when we're having this conversation. And as I've done this for longer, you try to figure out what works and what doesn't with coaches. Why do some guys fail and why do some guys succeed? And humility is something that I continuously come back to. And him saying, I don't know what we're going to be this year. And I remember talking to him last summer and sitting in his office and we were talking about the tight end room and how young it was. And it was just kind of like, yeah, we'll see how it goes. And it wasn't a complaint. And there are times where you open a door for a guy to complain about his situation or his roster, or you open a door for a guy to tell you what's going to happen and be really self-satisfied with it. It's like, oh, we're going to do this and we're going to do that. And what I've really learned is guys are wrong more often than they're right when they talk like that. And the guys who can kind of embrace the ambiguity and can kind of embrace this lack of understanding about how it's going to go and live in that, those are the guys that consistently have success. And he is one of those coaches. And you combine that with an ability to unlock those guys, an ability to live in the patience that it required to unlock those guys, the work that he did with Jourdan. And I don't want to be dismissive of what he did with Aaron over those last couple of years. That is another exercise in humility.
Right.
This ability to kind of reach him halfway and to say, all right, let's figure out what you like and how we can kind of blend the offense I want to run with the offense that you want to run. The guy won 2 fucking MVP awards with that being their working relationship. That's remarkable.
Yeah.
And then you combine that with what they were this year. I mean, over the last 4 years, only the Chiefs have a better EPA per play than the Green Bay Packers. Only the Chiefs. And he has been a huge part of that along with what Aaron was. And there's so many other things that we can talk about, but I just think that combined with what he did this year and this being kind of him stamping his flag and this is who I am. This is who I am in this hierarchy. This is who I am in this league. He did that this season. And that's why I think putting him here, even if some people are going to consider it a little bit crazy, I don't.
Packers fans, I'm ready for you to flood all of the people who are like, what the hell were you thinking in my mentions with thanks for picking our guy. This drown out the noise, Packers fans. No,
the
but
Joe Barry thing is the only one.
Yeah,
that's
was
like
tough.
You cut that 1 year earlier and you give yourself a better chance over the last couple of years. That's the one thing where I wish he would have pulled the ripcord slightly quicker than he did, but that's really my only gripe. If you look at, to me, one of the biggest things about him is he's a departure from the rest of these young play calling head coaches who have no idea how to manage a game and who consistently make problem decisions in that area. He's third in the EPA per play that they've generated on 4th down decisions over the past 3 years. If you look at the Ben Baldwin model about when teams should go for it, the Packers were number 1 in the NFL over the past 4 years and going for it on 4th down when they should. Among this group, That is incredible
That's
because he is the
remarkable.
outlier among these guys. So even that little nitpick that you can have with McVay, you can have with Shanahan, who we'll get to, he doesn't apply there. So he really checks so many more boxes than I think other people understand about what kind of coach he is.
Yeah, and then to peel back even further, I mean, first of all, the Rodgers thing cannot go understated. I think we know more now than we previously did about
Mhm.
what it did take and what it was to actually build out a playbook and a cohesive plan in that time. And the functionality of it was remarkable. And between coach and player, I mean, it just we now know what that kind of we know more about what kind of an effort that would have taken from either side. But then also the fourth down thing, most coaches don't build sections in their playbook with variability fourth down plays at any level. And you have a bucket that you pull from, you have a section, but in terms of the evolutionary nature of other down and distance plays, like that is a tough thing to build into your week of practice. Like there's no time to install some of those things for the way that practices are structured. And like I remember hearing stories about like, oh, ex coach who I'll leave private, like, oh, ex coach, you're installing a fourth down play that you might run like as you walk to the bus to like go to the stadium. Like, just think there's no time. And so that's part of the reason why so often I think we see people, because investing into the data, investing into the analytics, but also investing into the tutelage that it takes to balance that known win probability, to balance some of these models, to first of all to invest in the resources to find those trusted models and develop them in house, but then also to balance that one side of the building with the football side of the building, like to actually mesh the and marry the two thoughts together, which actually should be one of the same thought because everyone's trying to win football games and score points. But I digress. Like it's very hard to do. And I think Matt has done a really good job of that. And it is striking the difference. It's not the only thing. It's certainly not one of the only 10 things, but it is striking and it is noticeable because he's clearly built a time in the week where that is something that they are devoted to, of those game situationals and scenarios.
Absolutely. And a lot of these play calling guys, you only have so much bandwidth. And that's something that often falls by the wayside. And the fact that it hasn't with him, I think that's very impressive. So I had him at 4, and I have no issue with this. That being said, I'm taking Kyle Shanahan. And it was a conversation with me. It was an internal conversation about Kyle or Sean at number 2. And here's the reason for that. I think that while Sean is incredible, Matthew Stafford is amazing. Like Matthew Stafford is playing football at a crazy high
rising
level.
tide. Yeah.
And, I mean, and you look at it, and I'm not going to have Sean weighed down by what he did with Brett Rippon for one game, but having Matthew Stafford is very nice.
Yeah.
Kyle Shanahan's ability to create the most devastating offense in professional football over the last 2 years with Mr. Irrelevant at quarterback, even though he's better than that, even though his particular skill set has elevated them in ways that other replacement level quarterbacks cannot, he has still built the best offense in the NFL with the guy who was the last pick in the draft. And he did it immediately. That's insane. And you look at what the staff turnover has looked like in San Francisco. It's similar. He's lost so many guys, and the ability to consistently iterate on the next steps of what that offense has to be while dealing with similar turnover that Sean's had to deal with in LA, it's remarkable. And it can't be overstated how hard that is to do. But the last thing I'll come back to with Kyle, it's the way they play. That's what I always come back to. It's not the way the X's and O's are drawn on the chalkboard. It's not the way that the designs are. It's not the intellectualization of the sport. It's the fact that they play so hard. When you watch Brandon Ayuk block or Jawan Jennings, just what's instilled about the style of offense we're going to consistently play. And it trickles over to the defense too. That's what I come back to. That's what culture is. When you can have that, and that just goes down to every single guy on the roster, that's what culture is. And that's how they play. It's not just the designs, it's the style and the mindset that they play with that makes them as good as they are. And you can't just copy that. That's something that a head coach and the guy at the top of this instills. And I think that he has done a remarkable job of that.
Yeah, I was very surprised at not putting Kyle higher in my.
What kept you from doing that?
I think some of it is the closing element of things, getting so close, and
I
then
know.
one or two things. But I also don't think that's fair, right? I think that's hypocritical because I'm not assigning that to people who maybe haven't even had an opportunity to be in those situations
That's
just
the
yet.
thing.
So that's why this is
Fall
really hard.
short at the end, you have to get to the end.
Yeah,
And I think I don't want to hand wave it, but there is an element of randomness with
yeah,
that stuff that I think
exactly.
people aren't necessarily willing to admit, but it's very real. Like, in order to lose a 28-3 lead, which was not all his fault, you have to have a 28-3 lead in the Super Bowl.
Yeah, I think, and again, I don't think all of the blame that comes his way in those moments, some of it is merited, some of it is not, because again, these games are so randomized. Something could, a butterfly flaps its wings and like all of a sudden, like someone drops a pass. It's
Devontae
just
Freeman misses a block and the
it's
Falcons lose the Super Bowl. It takes one thing.
yeah, and so I think anyone listening to this knows how much I respect Kyle Shanahan and like think the world of what he's created too. Because what I'll say is I think it surprised me because I think that for me the reason why I didn't have him higher was the double-edged sword of, again, some of the things that I brought up with Sean, where you built the entire plane around this guy and how he functions at his best. And I will say that I refer to Kyle a lot as a long haul trucker because he's built for this. Like he's built for the pain of it. He's built for the torture of it.
He's done it for
He's
a
he's
long
built
time.
yeah, and he's built for it. And he's built for the constant, like I don't even know, I legitimately don't know what he would be like if he won one, because I can see in my mind's eye this like endless loop of this guy innovating and building, and it's Sisyphus pushing the boulder up the hill. And that's in my mind's eye who he embodies to me, of like, if we're looking at this group collectively as like, this is your lot and this is what, and you just continue to push the boulder. And so I think it's a complicated thing. I think when I'm looking at, the Sean McVays, the Andy Reids, and it's not like Kyle hasn't recently developed talent. I mean, it's right there in front of you, the talent that he's helped develop. And then also the way that he designs his scheme to not just uplift players, but also to empower them, because they will hurt you. Like that, it doesn't matter what you're doing on defense because they're going to run over you and they're going to hit you in the mouth. And it's like, it's almost like this. I don't know. I kind of think part of it is I picture him off into this vortex elsewhere. Like he's not of this group or this list. He's kind of like over there. And he just, because he's done it for so long at this point, but he's done it in this specific way for so long at this point. But there's also this like deeply feudal way to like how his arc has happened. And when I did play callers, it was like very clear the comfort level with that level of darkness you have to go to and that you will go to. And that's why I call him a long haul trucker, is because he will be doing this. I think he will be doing this longer than even he says he will be doing it, because I think he has gotten very, very comfortable in that place. And whatever the team looks like, after this year or after the next 2 years, he will know how to build it. And he's done like the long build. And he's also done, okay, team is in contention, start adding pieces and investing there. So the versatility there is also striking. I don't know. I could not put my finger on what stopped me, frankly. And that's not logical or sound. And you guys can let me hear it. Fine. I do not know what stopped me, other than feeling I think, completeness in the trajectory of a Matt LaFleur from what he had to deal with and what he did the year over year 22-23.
You can make an argument that the best days for, I don't know if the best days for McVay, but maybe the best days, and the best days for LaFleur are still ahead of them. I think you can make an argument for Kyle that that's not the case. I think that what he has done over the last couple of years is the greatest painting he'll ever paint. And we'll see what happens as they kind of have to pick up the pieces. The guys get more expensive, et cetera. But I just think that their ability to constantly be tweaking, constantly be pushing things forward, and really being at the cutting edge offensively is just that's what I would want. I would want that every single year. And I think we would get that. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I am interested in exploring it a tiny bit more. If he won one, you can know them better than I do, and you can tell me if I'm wrong with this. I think with Sean, it was he thought that there would be like satisfaction in it that there maybe wasn't, that it would solve things that it maybe didn't. And with Kyle, I think that it would be temporary relief, but it would be very temporary. I don't think he'd be looking for any sort of like actualization in it if they won one. I think it would be a moment of relief, and then it would just be back to the grind again. That's like the slight differentiation in how I would kind of frame the accomplishment for both of them.
Yeah, I don't even know if I would say relief with him, frankly. I mean, I think he would be utterly ecstatic, obviously, but I also think he knows things about the depths of what this job is that I think Andy Reid knows those things. But among all of the other people we're talking about here, I think that Andy Reid and Kyle are very similar in that way, where it's like it's winning a Super Bowl is the ultimate goal. It's the only thing for all of these guys, right? I think that Kyle, and this is my opinion, I think that Kyle, I don't even know that I would use the word relief, because I think it would just be another point in a very long timeline of understanding this sport on a level that's not necessarily quantified by wins and losses and championships. And that doesn't mean to say he doesn't want one, or he's not going to, do everything and push himself to the limits to get one. It's like multiple things can be true at the same time. I just think that he kind of like you're alluding to, I do think he compartmentalizes or internalizes the things that happen through the course of a coach's timeline differently. Yeah. I don't think the worst thing in the world to him is losing the Super Bowl. I think it's being behind. I think that's a differentiator that I think Sean had to realize, but Kyle's known it for a long time.
All right, let's get to our next one here. Though again,
what number are we on?
We're on 5. So you have the 5th pick here. Those are the 4 that I had in the top 4 of my big board. Who are you going with at number 5? Because I think this is where things get very interesting.
I got Dan Campbell.
Okay. I like it. I had him at 6. So
I will tell you, I had someone else. I flip-flopped between him and someone else here probably about 40 times over the course of it, to where I literally have them listed parallel on my note sheet, because that's how like agonizing this decision was. But I feel like we're starting to get a little bit unfair as to what he has built over the course of a couple of years. And that's the only reason I picked him over this other person that I have next on my list. And we're going to share big boards at the end. Fine. But like, it took years and patience, and a patience that you see people flame out of more often than not. And a true like a proof year over year over year of proven data of collaboration with the front office, of truly investing in a partnership with the front office. It's similar to why I put Matt high, is like there's proof of that true collaboration. Sometimes it doesn't work the best like that, but if it does in your building, you lean into it. And Dan
Campbell,
secret
and sauce, man. That's what everybody's after, and they have it. And I think the Packers have something similar.
Yeah, and it is so interesting the way that he reaches players, but he thinks forward. He blends that old school coaching mentality with this real progressiveness and how he thinks about the sport and how the sport changes and evolves and adapts. Somehow he's built the kind of culture that like the hot name in offensive coordinating like doesn't want to leave.
It's insane. It's incredible.
And I got to tell you, like I covered the end of the Jared Goff era in Los Angeles, and I watched very closely the start of the Jared Goff and the continuation of the Jared Goff era in Detroit. And the thing that sets Dan Campbell apart, I think, and the way that he built out that staff to also reach players and instill confidence, even in dark days and hard times, and to keep pushing forward and to like fully open himself up and be like this emotional guy that we see at the podium, but he's not showing us that. He's showing his players that. That's what I think
Mhm.
people miss. He's not showing us that for our audience viewing. He's showing that out in the open for his players. He's being the same out in the open to the world, showing that he's the same guy with his players, and he's showing his players that he's no bullshit. And so that's the one thing I think people like kind of overlook. The other thing is he understands pace. Like Sean McVay and Jared Goff, the one thing that I think the right word, the right characterization of this, and there was emotions and whatever, all that stuff. I'm not talking about that. They were at different paces in terms of their growth plan, their development plan.
Mhm.
Sean's pace started at an all-out sprint in 2017, and it only got faster. Jared's pace was when he was still a very young quarterback, still developing, had a nightmare of a rookie season where he could have just completely, fallen off the quarterback cliff like we talked about before, but stayed the course and stayed tough and stayed true to like trying to develop. It's at a different pace. But what Dan Campbell understood, and when it's like human evolution, like, when you're talking about like relationships in general, no two people evolve and grow and change at the same time. And they very much did not evolve and grow and change at the same time. And it became an issue. And so now when you're talking about understanding pace, it doesn't mean that Dan Campbell necessarily, had all the pieces of a roster to like immediately make a run. Like we remember what those first couple years were like, but he didn't, to me, he didn't place the onus or the pressure solely on the quarterback to fix it all, to be the type of guy. No, you're growing with us. I don't care about your draft status. I don't care about, what you've accomplished. You've been to a Super Bowl. Like let's toss all of that out. And instead, we're all going to grow at the same time. We're going to match each other's pace. And then in doing so, we are going to understand each other. And I think that is some secret sauce as well of what Dan Campbell has, that sort of it factor that separates him in this field from a lot of coaches, and also ranks him very high for me. The tenure of doing so over the last few years versus a guy on my list who I am very, very high on has been doing it for 1 year, and Dan Campbell has been doing it for multiple years, and that was the differentiator for me.
I think that's totally fair, and I think that what they've been able to establish, we talk about culture all the time, how you play, how you approach things, just everything about the feeling of watching that team play. Even with those awful rosters, it was there. You saw it from the start. And that's why when they started adding talent, the projection and the trajectory was very easy to understand, because the baseline level of this is what Detroit Lions football looks like. These are the types of people that we want. This is the way that we're going to play. That was in place from day one. And that part of it, I think, is what people are going to attach themselves to. And you mentioning the emotional parts of it, it's being genuine. Not everyone's going to get away with that level of outward emotion as an NFL head coach, because people are going to think that it's phony. Your players are going to think that it's phony. They're going to see through it. That's who he is. And I think that people attach themselves to him because they understand that it's genuine. So all of these kind of intangible aspects of who the Lions have been, I think that's what a lot of people will say is the selling point about Dan Campbell. What I think is so impressive is the intellectual parts of this. The fact that he's one of the
nerd.
in-game decision makers in the NFL. They are first in the EPA that they have added on fourth down decisions over the last 3 years. The Detroit Lions, the biting kneecaps Detroit Lions, have been better in those scenarios of adding win probability than any team in the NFL. And if you go beyond that, timeout usage, the way they understand the clock, the choices they make based on, we're going to the 2-minute warning anyway, so why don't we just run the ball here because it doesn't really matter because the clock is going to stop, or let's let it run down a little bit more here. Stuff that's hard to quantify, but you watch in real time. I think they're the best in the NFL at that, and that's him. If you are going to be a CEO type of head coach, you need to do two things. You need to set the feeling and the direction of the building, and you need to be an incredible in-game decision maker that adds value to your football team when you're not calling plays on the other side of the ball. Guess what Dan Campbell does? Both of those things. And he does them at, I think, arguably the highest level of any coach in the NFL. So I'm not going to have any sort of pushback here. He was right there and very close on my list. Two things I will say. One, I guess it's really just one thing. We have not seen him with a different offensive coordinator. If you remove Ben Johnson from this equation and you have to replace him, what does this look like? When we get a guy who's maybe 75% as special as Ben Johnson. What did the Detroit Lions look like? And there's a chance that they'll be able to replace him and they will be just fine. But unlike a lot of the other guys on this list, we have not seen this staff poached, and we have not seen them had to reset in the same way that a lot of other successful teams in the NFL have. That's partially because there's a gravity to what he's built and guys want to stay. But I do think that it is worth mentioning that it's still a question mark for them in a way that it isn't for some of these other teams, some of these other coaches.
Yeah, that'll be his big like LaFleur Rogers moment to me. And again, another reason why I have Matt higher in this case. I think that it is going to be a test of his ability to not just hire the right staff the first time, but to continue doing that, because it's not as if people aren't trying to poach his people. So we know at a certain point it's going to happen. I mean, that was very public and very loud. the attempted poaching is very loud. Stop screaming. But yeah, it was, I think that's going to be, like you said, that's going to be the next test. But I do think that's going to be sort of all of these guys that we're talking about in this top 10, they have these moments where they can either stay where they're at or they can continue to push. If I were to guess based on his history about anything about Dan Campbell, I would guess that he will continue to push. So it is really interesting. It's going to be interesting. That will be, like I said before, that will be his moment, similar to what Matt had with the departure of Aaron Rodgers, with Sean, and ironically this trade for Stafford, and then into 2022 with Kyle and Brock Purdy, and then Kyle and coming off, I think is coming onto one as well. This last loss, and the one that Andy Reid has thrived after a million times so far in his career.
All right, I got the next one here. This is the 6th pick. I'm going with John Harbaugh.
Ah, yes.
I've always been so impressed about his ability to reinvent the franchise, building it around Lamar Jackson and how unique of a player Lamar Jackson is, and understanding that they couldn't just do the same old things if they were going to get the most out of him. And that takes a lot as a coach. That takes foresight. That takes humility. It takes an understanding. It takes an ability to kind of see into the future. And he's been able to do that. And then you go back over the last 2 years and they've done it again. All right, what Wink did and what he was, that worked for us. It was hard to deal with. We were a different sort of beast on defense, but the way the league is going, we can't keep doing it this way. We need to kind of modernize this a little bit, make it a little bit harder to play against. So they hire Mike McDonald. He creates the best defense in the NFL, and then he gets hired away. Going out and getting Todd Monken last offseason and saying, you know what? This Roman thing has run its course. It was what it was, and we got a ton of success out of it. But if we're going to take this thing to the next level after paying Lamar, we need to take the offense in a slightly different direction. The ability to see those things pretty much at every single turn since he took that job and sustain success in the way they have, because he's been willing to be flexible in those specific areas as that CEO type of head coach. That's what does it for me. I just think that he's been really effective at those sorts of decisions over a really long period of time.
CEO head coach who, like you mentioned with Dan Campbell, is really, really good at a few things that do give his team advantages and edges perennially, annually. Special teams expertise. I was covering the game that the Ravens beat the Rams on the punt return touchdown ultimately. And, it's and then management, things like that. But I think
133 EPA of special teams value over the last 4 years. That is number one in the NFL. There's only 5 teams above 50. So think about that. That's 80 points over 5 years. That's an insane advantage. Justin Tucker's a huge part of that, but this is who the Ravens have been. It's quiet advantages all over the place.
Yeah, the front office has done this too, and that's where they are so in lockstep with each other. Is every front office talks about the Ravens front office and how they find small edges, quiet edges, overlooked edges. Everybody talks about John Harbaugh and how he and his coaching staff always find quiet edges, overlooked edges, little things that stack up. And over time, again, the flapping of a butterfly wing become like these incredibly significant swings over time because of the stacking and the patience that it takes to find tiny little leverage points and advantages. And obviously Lamar Jackson himself being a massive advantage point and a massive edge, but continuing to tweak the scheme, continuing to mess around with the different types of personnel that's around him, continuing to fiddle a little here and a little there. And like, yes, coordinator changes can seem very significant. And when they take those big swings, there's always a purpose and intent behind it. A meaning. It's okay, we've exhausted our edges here. Now let's go find a massive edge here and then continue to fiddle and adjust and tweak. I think that the way he empowers players to be themselves, he is kind of the elder statesman, one of them of the league. I'm not calling him old by any means. In fact, he looks like Brock Purdy's older brother, but like
he's a youthful 60 something at this
it's
point.
Weird. I texted my group chat like back when Brock first like kind of emerged in the league. And I was like, does anyone think that John Harbaugh is actually Benjamin buttoning Brock Purdy? Nobody responded. It's fine. No judgment. It's like, it's best to ignore me sometimes. I think that like he does continue to push and reinvent himself, but not in a way that's always so obvious or overstated. It can be sometimes finding those small things, taking a chance on a coordinator who maybe was lesser known in the NFL ranks, but who had this juice and this sauce that like could really make a difference, he could really understand the argument for why that person was ready. Mike McDonald was ready to meet the league where it currently was at. He's got this really remarkable ability to look at the landscape of the league around him and continue to, I think, not be too far out in front where he's the biggest target, but he's like when you're watching my metaphors have been awful. I'm sorry, but when you're watching like Olympic speed walking.
Sure. Yeah, of course. I spent a lot of time doing that
as one does. Yeah. As one does. But like when you see, and it's just like this, it's the peloton of the speedwalkers, right? And someone's way out in front. And then you just see just like this, the hips are swinging, right? And then like all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, they're going to take, that's John Harbaugh. He's like, he's kind of in the pack, at the front of the pack. And he looks around and he assesses where he's at, and he knows, he understands the striking points and the striking times, and he keeps his edges and advantages, and he studies the pack around him, and he finds those lanes and those leverages where, and I say speed walking because it happens over a period of time. He doesn't often always swing all at once. It's the steps. He takes all the steps and he doesn't skip them. And he doesn't break his form, which is big in speed walking.
This year. I think that's an example of it, where you have this shooting star that was the Miami Dolphins offense over the last couple of years. And then you get to the end of the year and the Ravens just dismantled them. And it's like, oh yeah, I forgot that those guys are always kind of there lurking. Like this team is always there.
They reflect him in that I love this pick, by the way. This was a cluster that was very hard for me. They are so methodical in the way that they destroy you. And it can happen all at once over a very long period of time. And they may not always be necessarily like, they've had dips, but they're never going to last. And they've had lulls, and some of it's due to injury and stuff like that with the quarterback and availability with the quarterback. But like, that every single year of this modern era of the Harbaugh-led Ravens, they are always going to be a challenge. And if you look away from them for too long, they will catch the rest of the league totally by surprise, because there they were sort of methodically stacking pieces together the entire time. You almost can't take a breath or a pause against them at all. You can't attack them the way that you want to. You almost have to play by their rules every time you play them, which is that's a hallmark of good coaching and a good team.
Yeah, he has a 61.8% winning percentage, which is 20th all time, tied for 20th all time, and is very, very high among active head coaches. Only Andy Reid, Mike Tomlin, Mike McCarthy have a higher winning percentage among active head coaches than John Harbaugh. So it's been pretty consistent for a very long period of time with very different looking teams, very different looking quarterbacks. Mm-hmm. I find that very impressive. All right, number 7, you're up. Who you got?
DeMeco Ryans.
That is aggressive. And
it is aggressive.
I initially had him in my top 10, and he fell out because it was like, it's only been a year.
Right. That was my pause.
Questions. I'm curious to get into this, but that is very ambitious. Why 7 for DeMeco Ryans?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think he did, deserves is maybe the wrong word, because everybody deserves the things that they work hard for. But I think it's a good spot for him among this cluster of coaches who reach their locker room. They think about football both in the way that applies directly to the human beings in their locker room and developing them as people, but also forward-thinking, progressive scheme. Defensive guy, his scheme is very progressive. His scheme is incredibly difficult to counter. It is people have tried to replicate it and have not been successful. I think that's also really important. And he knows how to hire. He knows the type of people, not just the people who are going to be calling his offense. And I thought about maybe dropping him a little bit because as a defensive coach, you're probably going to lose your offensive coordinator at some point.
Almost happened already.
Yeah, right. If you are successful, you are going to lose that person. But when I look at hiring, I'm looking at the layers of hiring that he has installed in place, because right behind Bobby Slowick is Jourdan Johnson, who used to coach CJ Stroud at Nike Elite 11 camps back when CJ Stroud was coming up through high school. And trusting that connection, trusting that intel, trusting that development from the ground up, and then creating layers of empowerment on your staff as a defensive coach, not micromanaging, where you're taking a look at the defense, but you're also in that CEO mentality where you're looking holistically at putting the right people in place for your offensive staff to not only continue this quarterback's development, but also to continue to put pieces of an offense together that was freaking fun. I mean, that offense was fun. The defense was fun, but you're looking at some of the people he developed on defense as well. The young players, the players who bought in. One thing, I was talking to a Texans coach the other day, and the one thing that he talked about was that DeMeco fosters a culture where nobody is afraid to bring up ideas. It doesn't matter what side of the ball, in a big room together, and nobody's afraid to disagree and turn that type of functional conflict into problem solving. That is not easy to do. It's not easy to do ever. To do it in your first year as a coach with a specialty on one side of the ball, to me, that lasts. That sustains. The reason why he was tough for me with a Dan Campbell is Dan Campbell's been doing it longer. But the things we're talking about here are very similar. He just happens to be young. He's done it for 1 year. I think that it's a major testament as well to what can happen when a dynamic, smart, progressive-minded, culture-forward and culture-oriented, developing young coach can pair with the right quarterback, and they can continue to grow together. Like similar to, to take it to the other side of the life timeline here, when we're talking about Andy Reid pairing with Patrick Mahomes, that happened at the right time for Andy Reid, because he was becoming new again. Like he was sort of becoming, but he had that amazing year, and then he pairs with the right guy at the right time. And you could see them, even as great as Andy Reid has been at designing an offense and calling plays for a long, long time, you could see them grow together. I think the pairing that correct coach with the correct quarterback, to me, all of those reasons, including the ones I mentioned before, are why this actually does sustain forward in terms of the caliber of coach that DeMeco is. And like I said, his staff cannot speak more highly of him, which again, everybody wants a spot in some of these new jobs. Everybody wants to be at the front. Everybody's agents are feeding, everyone, all of the names and all of this stuff. Everybody's doing that. But the common theme that keeps emerging is that everybody loves working for him and everybody loves DeMeco.
Yeah, everything you said is what I've heard in talking to people who work for him. And the Jourdan Johnson point is one I was going to make as well, because that's the question. It's all right, if you're going to be a defensive-minded head coach and your guy's going to get poached, what's your plan? Do you have a succession plan in place? Have you built the sort of staff and the sort of ecosystem offensively that can sustain that sort of loss? And Jourdan Johnson is somebody that I would bet on. And hearing about his interviews for offensive coordinator jobs this year and talking to him, I think that he is one of those guys that was the right sort of second layer of a staff hire that makes you feel comfortable and enthusiastic about where this can ultimately go. All of that being said, we haven't seen it yet. Haven't seen it yet. And that's what holds me back.
Thing.
But I think that you getting in front of it, I respect that, because I think that there in a year, in 2 years, in 3 years, we could look at him as the 7th pick in something like this and think about how silly it was that he lasted that long. But I just think we've seen guys do it for a year or two and then fall off. And that's why it's just hard for me to throw him in here with guys who've had a little bit more sustained success. But I'm with you on pretty much everything that you said. The other side of it, the one other thing I'll mention, the in-game decision-making has not been great. And that is something when you're an early head coach that can happen. But as a defensive-minded head coach, that worries me because sometimes that can creep in with these guys. There's a conservative approach to this that is ultimately going to hamstring you when you're having to game plan and go against these guys who are truly exceptional in-game decision makers. So that's the one other thing that knocked him a little bit further down my list, but it's mostly just a time on task, skins on the wall sort of conversation.
Yeah, and I think for me, on all of these guys, it's been a cool, a positive or negative, like slight variable, and not necessarily a deeply significant one in terms of the more granular side of the decision making in game. I think that does continue to develop depending on like what you're investing in your building and in yourself as a coach. We've seen coaches develop. We've seen coaches stay rigid and stuck in their ways, but we have seen coaches develop and kind of get, on the train in terms of that. I think with D'Amico, one of the things, so I did keep him, I think he's brilliant, but I did push him down, in the conversation alongside with Dan Campbell because of the tenure thing. But then the other thing that does sort of give him a boost, in my opinion, is the fact that he spent time working for Kyle Shanahan. And I think that you see, like I said, you see the darkness at that point, but you also, there is a, you are in a building that has the type of continuity that allows you to take risks, that allows you to try things, that allows you to push and evolve forward. And you learn a lot of lessons working for Kyle Shanahan that it's very hard to get in other places. And so I think in terms of, can he sustain? I think he can. In 2 years, I could be completely wrong. But my gut and my instinct, and then the body of work that he's built so far, plus his background and his history and his sort of understanding of the league on the deepest level, and understanding the way that coaches tick on the deepest level for better and for worse. To me, that makes him certainly top 10, and I have him at 7.
Yeah, I don't blame you at all. I think that those instincts are leading you in the right direction here. I'm just a coward and need a little bit more time.
Well, I don't have to be here every day. You have to be here every day. So I get to leave. You're in the shit like every day. So.
All right. This is tough. This next cluster was hard for me. I really struggled. My top 6, and the guys that came off in pretty much that order, I felt confident about. At 8 here for me, I'm going with Sean McDermott. And the reason
that's aggressive. What do you mean I'm aggressive?
The reason that I'm going, I think that he has what they have built over the last 5-6 years, I think has become underrated in a way. And I think that we think about Sean, the changes that they've had at their offensive coordinator spots and some of those moving pieces, and maybe that's a knock against him, but I think that their ability to find the right guy to run the offense and have consistent success on offense is really impressive. As a defensive-minded head coach, that doesn't always happen. He found Brian Daboll after 1 year of Rick Dennison, and it made a huge difference in Josh Allen's development. Ken Dorsey, even though he had to fall on the sword this year, he did a good job. That offense was very good. And then going to Joe Brady, I think that they now have a third guy that you can feel very good about. With defensive-minded head coaches, how you're building the offensive ecosystem becomes the biggest question for me. And I think that they've done a consistently good job during McDermott's tenure at doing that. So the offense, I feel very good about and have felt very good about for a defensive-minded guy, which is always a question. The defense has been excellent since he got there. It's been really, really good. Over the last 5 years, only the Patriots have a better EPA per play on defense than Sean McDermott's Bills. And if you're going to be a defensive-minded head coach, I hope that you can get that shit in order. And I think he's done a really good job of that. And the last part of this is he is consistently putting his team in putting his team in good spots with the decision-making that happens. So they added more win probability via 4th down decisions than any team in the league last year. And if you go back several years, they're consistently going forward on 4th down when they should, managing the games in ways that they should. And that's what a head coach is. Those are his 3 jobs if you're a defensive-minded head coach. You're making in-game decisions, you're in charge of hiring on the offensive side of the ball, and can you be somebody that consistently makes your defense really good? And he's done that. This has been a really successful organization over the last few years. And he's not a dynamic personality. Obviously we've talked about some strained metaphors. There have been some issues with things he's done in the past, all of that. But I think in some ways what he has done there has become underrated because of some of those louder bits of dissension, we'll say, over the last couple of years. So I was surprised too, but I had him at 8 in this exercise in front of a couple guys that I kind of thought I would have ahead of him when I started.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thought experiment. I didn't have him clustered here, but again, I think I would push back a little that the defensive head coach only has 3 jobs. I think the culture building, talent identification on both sides of the ball, I mean, that can be where we sometimes see defensive personnel stretched kind of thin, is when they do have to step into those rooms, and can they do it? Obviously working with Brandon Beane is really good for Sean McDermott. Having a previous relationship with Brandon Beane dating back to their time in Carolina and even before that, coming into Buffalo and being on one accord right away, identify the quarterback, find the quarterback, and build everything else around that quarterback. That's a solid plan. I think that's a good plan. That also, to me, takes some of the pressure off of a defensive head coach, especially in the earlier days. I think the things that they did collectively to continue Josh Allen's development and trajectory into being like one of the most fun quarterbacks we've seen in recent history, and certainly one of the best quarterbacks currently playing, that's also impressive. So I don't want to undersell Sean McDermott's role in any of those things. I would say I would push back a little bit in terms of some of the coaches who maybe have been doing that a little bit longer than he has. I look at like the Mike Tomlins of the world, where always has a great defense, is never actually a bad team, can be questionable sometimes, like have a little diciness, and also doing that without having the answer at quarterback in these recent years. And also, some of the onus does fall on that coach for not identifying that quarterback or not helping to identify that quarterback. So this is where things get a little bit nuanced and a little bit convoluted. But I think for me, it's not that I have a huge argument against it. I just thought that other people, particularly with some of their the style at which they have decided to operate as an organization, as a staff, sort of meets the league in terms of like where some of the trends are going right now.
I think that's fair.
But Sean McDermott has been doing it for a few years at this point, and
it's more about results than it is about projecting forward. I think that's why I was swayed that way, is because
and I think that's where we looked at it.
Consistently good at building this.
Yeah, and I think that's where we looked at that. This is fun because this is where it slightly starts to alter, because I looked at it as if you were going to pick tomorrow and build for the next 10 years, who are you picking? Like that's literally how I looked at it. And
I think that's totally fair.
Yeah, so it's interesting
if you look at it that way. Yeah, I get it, but it's
you can argue for and against, I think, and with Sean, like again, I'm not pushing back necessarily against putting him here because his results have been impressive over the last couple of years, and also I think his own development as a coach in terms of kind of coming out of his shell a little bit when he was the DC in Carolina, and then understanding what it was going to have to take to like lead an organization. And then some of his mistakes and flaws, like becoming very public. And then some of the bumps along the way being what they have been. But the Bills are now a tough out. They're always a tough out. I think if you were going to say, find me a coach who's going to build a team that will be a tough out every single year because they will sort of embody his own toughness, Sean McDermott is one of those few coaches that you would pick.
Who's your next one?
What number are we at? Because I'm scrolling around 9. On my list. We're at 9. Oh, I don't know if you're going to like my pick. You might like my pick. I don't know if you're going to like my pick. I'm scared now. There's going to be, this one's, okay, this is aggressive. This is also a little aggressive. I picked Kevin O'Connell.
That's not surprising. I do not have him in my top 10, but he was right on the edge. He's actually my first guy off. So I don't think that's aggressive at all, because I almost put him in there, and we'll get to the reasons why I didn't and why I had like a couple guys ahead of him, but he was right on the edge for me.
Yeah, this was where it got tough. Because again, I have like a cluster here of a lot of people who I think should have cracked the top 10. Like I have Mike Tomlin in my top 10, for example. I did not have Sean McDermott in my top 10, but I did put Mike Tomlin in there. With Kevin O'Connell, I looked at it through the lens of, you're an owner, you're going to build a team. You want a team that's going to be, you want a successful team. You want your head coach to be in place for the next 10 years. And so I picked Kevin because of his understanding of the quarterback position, not just his understanding and communication of the quarterback position in a league that is investing in quarterbacks at a higher rate than ever before, more talented, dynamic, all the way up, ranging up into transcendent. And then also quarterbacks are around. Quarterbacks are faster, they're smarter, they're stronger, they are, and I hopefully, like, the Kurt Warners of the world don't hear this and push back on me. Like, the old guard is great too, but in terms of just the things that we now know about what quarterbacks can do, and the things that we now know about the lifespan of quarterbacks, and the things that we now know about how to be successful at the position, and what it can really mean to your organization if you are successful at that position for even 5 years, less so 10, versus if you are not. We also know, we've seen now what a real quarterback developer paired with a great system, paired with the right quarterback, or the right guy that fits you as a coach. We've seen how those players can thrive. There's several examples of those who are, racking up the EPA per play in this league right now. And I think that's where I give the edge to Kevin O'Connell, because he understands the quarterback position on a level that few coaches do. And I'm not saying that just because he played. I'm saying, like, he is a massive geek when it comes to understanding the quarterback position, and has been that way for a long time, still is that way. And I watched him bridge any sort of gap in communication, even between two of the really most renowned minds in football, which were Matthew Stafford and Sean McVay. Translating a language one person had in one building and a language another person had in another building, and marrying the two together. I mean, what the Rams were able to accomplish in 2021, that's Kevin O'Connell's fingerprints are all over that.
Mm-hmm.
And his communication ability, and his ability as a teacher to reach, a quarterback who he was the same age as I think at that time, like, who had seen it all, had done it all, but to reach that player, and then also to bridge the three of them together in what became a really interesting, really important schematic twist on what the old offense looked like, and to do that without, like, a run game for most of the year. So I watched him teach, and I think that's where, for me, I mean, it was solid in my head that he would be a head coach, the second I got to listen to those things. But also to watch him kind of roll through the quarterbacks that he has, and it has not been pretty at times, and the team has not, they've just been sort of washed in chaos at times. But I think one thing has stayed consistent, and he's reached every single quarterback. You could see where the work and the teaching has come in with every single quarterback, even on disastrous games, even in failure. You can see where some of the principles and some of the work and some of the methods apply. So if my parameter that I set, and I'm trying not to move goalposts here, I told you at the beginning of the show, I'm trying to stick with this parameter of who do you want to be coaching your team for the next 10 years? This is why I put him at this pick, because I think he will reach the quarterback. And if you can reach the quarterback and you can solve that question, you can build the ship around the quarterback.
All of that is totally fair. And that's why he was, like, my first guy off. When we talk about the rest of the list, I had him at 11th, and I had him in his own spot at 11th, because I think you could have put him any spot.
You did the old Shanahan lateral.
Yeah. I mean, it's just for all the things that you said here. And I think that being able to move off of the defensive coordinator and hire Brian Flores going into year 2, and being able to see what that could do for your defense, and a young defense that needed that sort of presence and that sort of unconventional approach, that is a level of foresight that I want out of my head coach. In so many ways, he is a modern NFL head coach. Even the way that he becomes, like, the face of the franchise in quiet ways, like the way that he's out as a forward-facing element of who the Vikings are right now. That's not the most important consideration when you're hiring a head coach, is who's going to do good marketing for you. But I do think that he embodies that in a very specific way that aligns with the demands of the job in 2024. And I think for those reasons, and everything you said about the quarterback, I think that's right. The two things I would say, it's only been a couple years. And two, I think that the ideas of what the offense should be and how to solve some of the offensive problems that they've had, the explanations for how that was going to happen have always sounded good. In practice, they haven't necessarily come into view. The run game specifically. I think that they're thoughtful and proactive about how they're going to take this where they need to, but I think that there's been a gap between the plan and the execution over the last 2 years. That's the last thing that I will say. Because that's the one tiny thing that held me back a little bit is that you look at it and it's like, well, they've been like 18th in EPA per play on offense over the last 2 years. And that's when Kirk's been healthy. There's still a slight gap between idea and execution and an idea of what the Vikings can be and what they have been offensively specifically that I think I can't quite bridge that gap yet. And that's why I just push them down a little bit further than some of these other guys.
Yeah, but I would say if through that lens specifically, Sean McVay would not be in the top 7 if it were just looking at that lens specifically, because 2022 was a disaster. Yes, there were injuries, but his offense was behind. You go look at some of those early games, what they were trying to do, he was behind.
But they did bridge the gap eventually. They eventually did.
Sure,
get there.
That's the thing.
This year they got there.
So I'm not looking at it through the lens of like that specific lens. I think I'm looking at it more broadly, and then also into future potential based on foundational elements of what coaching is and like what you can see the theory, even if the execution and you can kind of see where they're trying to get, they just haven't gotten there yet. And I think, you can, similar to Sean in 2022 and 2020, you can say, okay, well, they've had basically chaos at one position or two positions. And for that reason, everyone's patching the tire fire at that point. Everyone's like, the meme of the guy with the giant tub of water and he like puts a patch of duct tape over it. It's like fixed, that's happening. If that happens at any one position, that's where everyone's attention goes to. And so it's not that that's not a good reason to knock him down. I do think that's a good reason to knock him down, but looking at it solely through that lens and not globally in terms of you can see where they're trying to go. You can see what you could see where they were trying to go on defense, and then eventually they got there. It took an egoless move, in my opinion, to make that hire. Similar, we talking about Andy Reid letting his DC cook. Like you got to let Brian Flores cook, and cook he did. So you have to make those types of egoless decisions at times if you're going to be a really great head coach. And we've seen that with some of these great head coaches. But you can see where some of the steps are trying to be installed, and you could see the direction that they're going into. So again, looking at it through a global lens, and my parameter is of if you were going to plug this guy into a building tomorrow and say, take the keys, kid, and drive, and you want that person, what qualities that you hold most valuable, most crucial? For me, the quarterback is right at the top, reaching the quarterback, teaching the quarterback, developing the quarterback. Even last year when they cycled through so many, even fielding a functional, at times very dysfunctional, but at times functional passing game, even installing with a quarterback and then a different quarterback and then a different quarterback week over week over week. That's an enormous effort that requires completely adjusting and altering, again, an instilled language that has existed, for years. And so I think that type of malleability and that type of adjustability in reaching different types of players at the most important position in football, that to me stood head and shoulders above any missing potential that still has to manifest. And that's how I think that's how I look. Well, I don't think I know. That's how I looked at a lot of these coaches that I put in these positions.
Yeah, I had him as my first one off. And so my last one here, which is, I think this is the 10th pick.
Yeah. I think we've counted right.
I'm picking Mike Tomlin.
Yay! Good, because I had him here.
So the reason that I had Sean McDermott ahead of Mike Tomlin, because you mentioned this, is that Mike Tomlin has not gotten the offensive coordinator right. He hasn't. That is, you talk about the quarterback being paramount here, and I understand they haven't had the right quarterback. They haven't given their quarterback a chance over the last few years. And the only reason I'm even comfortable kind of putting Mike Tomlin on this list right now is because I think Arthur Smith is the correct sort of hire and the correct sort of direction. Even if it's not gangbusters, it is you hire somebody who has done this job effectively in the past to do this job for you. And so we'll see how that goes. Obviously, the quarterback is still a question, but I'm really hung up on their inability to get this right or even look in the correct spots over the last few years. And that's why I almost kept Mike Tomlin off. But I go back to this setting the feeling of what your team plays like and what your team feels like. And he does that as well or better than anybody. That defense is elite every single year. And their ability to kind of set that and have that be the foundation of who they are has been really impressive over the last several seasons and really since he got there. And just the way they practice, the way it feels there, he has been able to instill a certain attitude and a certain personality for what this team is, especially on that side of the ball. And I don't think that that can go overlooked. So the consistency and every layer to that, I think, is what ultimately puts him on here. Over the last 5 years, only the Patriots have a better EPA per play on defense than the Steelers. That's it. Only the Patriots. And they're consistently competitive. They consistently perform better on that side of the ball, and they probably should, given some of the talent deficiencies. I mean, there have been stretches where it's like, who's playing corner for the Steelers? It doesn't matter. Like they're going to be good on that side of the ball. It's the offensive decisions and the in-game decisions that ultimately push him down a little bit further than somebody of his track record might deserve in an exercise like this. But I still think that he deserves to be on this list, even with some of those things holding me back.
Yeah, obviously I didn't look specifically at the quarterback question when it comes to him because of his history there. And then also they're in like this new era of trying to figure it out. I think much more important right now. I mean, the quarterback obviously most important, but in terms of this exercise, much more important to look at was the OC, just like you're saying. That is questionable in terms of the decision-making, talent identification, even the what they say they're going to do versus what they actually do or do not do has been an issue there at times. And so I think like it's the difference between someone explained this to me, which was when one of the previous coordinators was there. It's the difference between motioning just to motion and motioning with an intent to sell a different alignment, spacing, create a new gap, to sell the why of the play. That's the difference between an offensive coordinator that is not getting the job done in that space and needs to, and someone who can truly bring an offense to life and make it three-dimensional. Less tortured metaphor. I finally did it. But I agree with you. I have Mike Tomlin's number 9 for me in my top 10. And you hear constantly how people, coaches, players, front office people around the league talk about him as one of maybe 3 coaches who, if they picked up the phone and called you and you were a free agent and he said, come play for me, you would be on a plane, no question. If you weren't already there already knocking on his door. That type of understanding of what it takes to sustain a culture. And we're looking at globally as an organization, what it takes to not just build, but sustain. That is an absolute X factor that you cannot quantify. You probably could quantify it if you looked at some of the the free agents and all that, but you can't actually, you either have it or you don't. And if you don't have it, you spend a lot of time and a lot of resources trying to find the little things that build up to having some version that equals it, right? And you still don't have it. And so I think that is where Mike Tomlin certainly stands apart. His understanding of what makes defenses special, how to get players in positions to be successful, even at times missing personnel, even at times rotating through injuries, dealing with things, an offense that time and again set that defense up for failure. And still, it was like, if you can score, this is a half full, half empty sort of test. Like, you could say, if you score 14 points, you will beat the Pittsburgh Steelers at certain points of the career, right? Because they weren't scoring points on offense. But also, if you're saying that, you're in for a fucking dogfight.
Yeah,
because
that's how it is every week.
It will take everything you've got simply to get to 14 points. So it's like, you could look at that as a positive or a negative. It's both. But I think that if he does, and perhaps he has, and like you said, Arthur Smith did some great things as a coordinator. Some people are well suited for that role, and especially Arthur Smith is tough-minded, I think, and stubborn, and also very creative. And I think that will thrive with Mike Tomlin's personality type, frankly. I think that will thrive under that building. under that roof. And I do think that will be good for the quarterbacks who are there as well. So I think this is a wait and see for me. But in terms of what Mike Tomlin does bring, what he has brought every single year, year over year over year, not just a guy who can maintain a culture, but a guy whose defense is going to kick you in the mouth and then like step over you. Like that is, and is always incredibly impressive schematically. Like that is what he brings.
All right. So that's the top 10. Let's list off your big board here so we can get to like a best of the rest near the end of your top 10 that we didn't get to.
Okay. And listener, please keep in mind, I have second guessed most of these. So.
I've second guessed all of it. You made me feel very bad about my Sean McDermott pick. We're not going to talk about it anymore.
I have a very expressive face, so I'm trying to work on that. And I like Sean. I've known Sean for forever. I like Sean. I think he's a great coach, but I was surprised by that. But you were surprised by D'Amico, so that's okay. Okay, I have Sean McVay, Matt LaFleur, Andy Reid. And by the way, I wanted to put Andy Reid at 2, but please keep in mind, listener, before you come yell at me, of the parameters that I was looking at this through, which I've said too many times at this point. Okay. Andy Reid, Dan Campbell, D'Amico Ryans, Kyle Shanahan. Oh, yeah. D'Amico Ryans, Kyle Shanahan, John Harbaugh,
Wow.
Kevin O'Connell. I know. That surprised me just now, actually. Maybe I messed that up. Mike Tomlin. And then I have Mike McDaniel at 10, but Kevin Stefanski is right up there with him.
Perfect. Here's my top 10. I had Andy Reid, Kyle Shanahan Andy Reid, Sean McVay at 2, Kyle Shanahan at 3, Matt LaFleur at 4, John Harbaugh at 5, Dan Campbell at 6, Sean McDermott at 7, Mike Tomlin at 8, and I had Mike McDaniel at 9 and Kevin Stefanski at 10. So let's do very brief Mike McDaniel and Kevin Stefanski conversations. We talk about the quarterback. The fact that Mike McDaniel is getting MVP level play out of Tua, who looked like he couldn't stick in the league under the previous coaching staff, that's what's important to me. And we're going to talk about the Dolphins this week on our AFC East Lingering Questions podcast. And I have some issues and some concerns about why that offense has flamed out late in the season over the last couple of years. But I am so impressed at where they look for answers and how they look for answers and pivot points in accordance with the identity that they have on offense. Their ability to be like, all right, here's a new way for us to throw a route to the middle of the field. You could think that they have to live inside this box and that's a problem, but their ability to make the box as devastating as possible over and over again, that's a skill. And I think his ability to tap into that and be as creative and as innovative as he has while trying to live in that sort of speed-based middle of the field world, it's amazing. And so that's why, even if they've run into some roadblocks, I have a lot of faith in their ability to kind of keep pushing this thing forward because I've looked at how proactive they continue to be.
Yeah, I think the difference between describing a rock star, brilliant offensive coordinator, who would do all of those things, and a really, really good head coach, which I believe Mike McDaniel to be, is, again, the way he reached the quarterback specifically, as a person and as a player, the way that he empowered the quarterback as a person and as a player, but also the way he reaches the rest of the roster as well, as people, as players. I was in Miami this last year working on a project about that short out motion that they run, which drove everybody nuts. And going in that locker room and seeing some familiar faces, good to see Jalen Ramsey again, but like they know, similar, we talking about Andy Reid earlier, they know that he will show up every day and he will give them the answers to the test in a way that makes them feel confident, empowered, and valued. And Robert, you and I have talked about this before. Mike's lived a life that a lot of people in this league either quietly have or haven't, in terms of some of the things that he's been through and some of the life stuff that has shifted and shaped his perspective on how to be and how he wants other people to feel around him. And I can't undersell that. Again, I'm looking at this through parameters of especially quarterback and certainly of what it means to be potentially a 10-year head coach versus some of the flash in the pan stuff. And there is no shallowness to that. And
Absolutely not.
And I think that that's where, because you have all the schematic juice that you could want out of Mike McDaniel. You just do. But you could have had that as a coordinator. The thing that does differentiate him is, again, what he established as the identity and going full send into that identity, committing to something simple yet really effective, which is speed, but then understanding how to manipulate that speed in every single part of that roster to where if you're a defense, you're practicing against it every day at pace. If you're special teams, you're practicing against it at pace. You have different things, that edges that you're trying to create, quiet edges that are very loud on game days, little wrinkles and things that you're just fiddling with and tweaking. And your players come along with you because they see it, they buy it, they explain, they understand the why of it, and you make them feel valued while they do it. And I think that that is what can differentiate, again, someone who's a lifetime offensive coordinator, a very good one, and a lifetime head coach and a very, very good one. And for those reasons, and probably more that I forgot to mention, he's in my top 10. And he barely edged out Kevin Stefanski, who I know you have a lot of history with, so I want to give you the floor on that one. But Kevin Stefanski is just like really consistent to me. He's smart. He's calm. He's consistent. He's stable. He's a lifer. Like he's got everything that you want, in a head coach. He doesn't have very many of the things that you don't want in a head coach. And so he fits right around here for me.
Everything you said about Mike, I think is spot on. The thing I always come back to with him is the first conversation I ever had with him, his focus on his job is to make the job easier for the players. I have to come every day and prove my worth to the players. That's how you stick. Is if that's your mindset, that's how you stick for a really long time. It's not about these shooting star schematic things. It's about that being the foundation of who you want to be every day in the job. And I think his willingness and ability to lean into that is why I would feel comfortable betting on him. With Kevin, it's the word you said is consistency. The two things I had in my first note are humility and consistency. His ability to be steady and stable no matter what's going on. They had 5 offensive tackles last year, and it's never woe is me. It's never like there's never a complaint about I can't believe this is happening. It's always this is the job. This is what it is. And I think every year he understands I don't know what's going to happen, and that's okay. And there is truly an egoless approach to the way that he goes about the job. And I think that you see that. You see that in the people that he hires. You see that in the way they've been able to pay assistants. I don't think a lot of head coaches, or there are some head coaches who I don't think would feel comfortable with their offensive line coach making millions and millions of dollars a year and having that sort of profile within the building.
Real football people would.
He doesn't give a shit.
Yeah.
Like he just doesn't care. And the ability to kind of identify Jim Schwartz as like, this is the pivot that we need. That's what being a head coach is. So he's just somebody that, and just consistently making offense easier on his guys with the way that they build it, screens, play action. It's not the sexiest thing in the world, but I think that it's the bedrock of what consistently makes offense easy. The Jacoby Brissett season looms large in my mind, like what they were able to do with him. And obviously it's been an adventure with what they've had to do on the field with Deshaun Watson, and it wasn't always pretty with Baker Mayfield. But I think going back to that humility and consistency, he's set up well and has the makeup to be good at the job for a long period of time. And that's why I also had him in my top 10.
I couldn't find a gripe with Kevin Stefanski. Like with some of these coaches, I could say, oh, well, there's a reason why I pushed him down. I couldn't really find anything with him, which doesn't immediately qualify him to rank above in terms of the positive qualities of some of the other people that I've listed. But I think it's really striking that you can't really find much to complain about with him or to even like nitpick about with him. And like, I even wrote it down. You said it a few minutes ago, but I just said, I bring up the consistency again. There's always chaos around the Browns, but Stefanski brings stability, problem solving, and a quiet glue mentality while also trying to innovate on offense as he goes, regardless of what is happening. And that's not always going to look like the new cutting edge thing, but it is going to still be something that works. And I think that is the differentiator there. Also, I did mix up D'Amico and Kyle. I had them numbered wrong and listed in the, I was like, I shocked myself when I was like, what the, yeah. I mean, no offense to anybody, but like, yeah, that was a flip them. Yeah.
So honorable mention here. I had Kevin O'Connell as my 10B. And then, so the other two guys I had in a section all their own after that, and it's kind of like a TBD thing because it was after 1 year, are D'Amico Ryans and Shane Steichen. Because I think the Shane Steichen, I think he's going to be really good at this. What they did on offense last year, what the Eagles looked like without him last year. You talk about an ability to innovate and kind of step outside of what his history has been offensively and what both the Eagles and Colts have looked like. Energy, what he's bringing, the play he got out of Gardner Minshew, but it's been a year. So I just can't do it with him or D'Amico yet because of the body of work, but they were in their own little section right after those guys. Jim Harbaugh, same kind of deal. It's like,
Yeah.
I think Jim Harbaugh is going to do a really good job at LA. I haven't seen him be an NFL head coach in a decade, so I can't put him on here. And that's really it. I'm surprised Sean Payton wasn't on here, but I'm concerned with the direction that that's going. That's really the only other name that I would throw out. Other than that, I feel okay, despite really second guessing myself with my Sean McDermott thing. But again, I bet out the body of work.
It's all right. I think you've made a good argument for all of your picks anyway. So Sean Payton is in my top 15, but he did not crack my top 10. I do have Steichen at 12. I had Mike McCarthy like right at the middle because it just feels like that's the right place.
Yeah,
right?
I think you could probably put him at like 16, which is probably where I would have had him.
Yeah. And also one thing I will say is I did not necessarily rank the guys who are incoming first year. For me, I wanted them to all at least have at least 1 year. So I kind of have them clustered like off to the side, not in Shanahan world. Shanahan's on Shanahan Island over here. In like this like island, like just encircled with ravens and clouds and also sunshine at the same time, which makes no sense. So you got to kick me off here at some point because the metaphors are going to keep coming. But
that's all. We'll use that as the time to do it. So
yeah, you got to kick me out. You got to kick me out of the room.
That is all we got. Jordan, sincerely appreciate the time. This was very, very fun. I think a lot of insight that people are going to appreciate. So thanks for doing it.
Thanks for having me.
All right, guys, that's all we got. Sincerely appreciate everybody listening. We will be back a little bit later this week. We're actually only going to do 3 shows this week. It's going to be our normal Tuesday, Thursday, Friday schedule. We're not going to squeeze another one in because it's the middle of June, and that doesn't seem necessary. So we're going to have our AFC East lingering question show on Thursday, and then we're going to come back with a second lingering question show about the AFC West on Friday. So be on the lookout for both of those. For now, that's all we got. Appreciate all of you listening. We'll talk to you soon.